Smashing points records. The introduction of new stats in the world of fantasy Major League Rugby has caused points to skyrocket this season. In an MLR 2023's round 5, a team in the very first Fantasy MLR League racks up the biggest team point total in the history of the Fantasy Ruckers League, tallying triple-digit points. And you might just guess who it is, and I know our Fantasy Ruckers League members have something to say about it. A full breakdown of this past weekend's matchups, top performers, the hottest on the waiver wire, and of course a look ahead to round 6's matches. The Fantasy Ruckers Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 58 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our Fantasy Ruckers community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. As always, I'm Ryan Yee. With me here, Matt Yee. And if you're watching the YouTube video, see him doing the Michael Jordan shrug, because what a week it was for Matt Yee, putting up the most points ever in the history of the Fantasy Ruckers League. You heard it in the teaser. You try to guess who it is, and of course, it's the guy who's been dealing with the poop emoji all offseason long. Like, he is turning heads right now as he's proving doubters wrong.
And look, you know who was the person who was giving me the most poop? The most poop emoji, to be specific, is Fitzy over there at Rugby Morning.
That's true.
Rugby Morning just happened to run into me this week. I just happened to put up over 100 points without my first round pick. Hey, it is what it is. Fitzy just ran into a hot hand, and unfortunately, everybody else who faces me is going to be running into a hot hand too for the rest of the season.
That's big talk for a guy that has been rolling this season so far. And we got to give a shout out here as well. Obviously, Devin Vanderpool couldn't make it on this episode of the Fantasy Ruckers Show, but he was able to rack up his very first win of the season against one of the top dog teams in the league, Rugby Wrap Up. So pretty cool for him to get into the win column 5 weeks into the season. Finally, I know he was ecstatic that he was finally able to shake that monkey off of his back.
Ryan, I don't want to call it too early, but I think it's time you retire the sad music. Vandy and I were about to go on a roll.
There you go. All right. Well, hey, we got a jam-packed episode in this episode 58. Obviously, like we do every single week, we're going to break down all the top fantasy performers from round 5, break down those matches from a fantasy perspective, give you some of the hottest waiver wire pickups coming up as the season continues to gruel on here. Of course, this is a grind of a rugby season, and it's also a grind of a fantasy rugby season too. We mentioned it over and over and over again. Just because you're at the top of the standings here, I know Matthew's talking big here, but just for Vandy also as well, who's at the bottom there, a lot can change here over the coming weeks, and a big part of that's going to be the waiver wire pickups as well. And of course, we're going to look ahead to round 6, give you guys a little bit of news and notes, and give you guys a little update of how the Fantasy Ruckers League is going. And you can obviously tell how that league is going for Matt Yee here, but we'll give you the inside scoop for all the other league members in the league as well. Going to be a fun show as always. And before we get things rolling here, always got to say it every single episode. If you aren't already, make sure you're following us at the Fantasy Ruckers. If you're watching on the YouTube video, you can see our at handles above there on top of us, at the Fantasy Ruckers on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Give us a like and subscribe on YouTube if you like what you're seeing. We come out with weekly content every single week. Really good stuff. And if all of that isn't enough for you as well, we got a Discord community. You can find that link down below in the description, where we got all the latest MLR talk happening there, fantasy and not fantasy related. It's been super fun to see that space kind of grow, and we'd love to have anyone who isn't in there yet join there already, or join there too as well. So it should be all good stuff. But yeah, let's get rolling right into it, Matt. Let's start talking about some news and notes so we can get to that update that I know that you're hoping for to hear very, very soon here. But yeah, the first news and note that we got to go across is we kind of alluded to it last show and talking about the big announcement that was coming. We kind of predicted that it might be the idea of having a neutral site for the MLR championship match And I guess we guessed right, because the 2023 championship match held on Saturday, July 8th, 3 p.m. Eastern time will be held at, I guess, somewhat of a neutral site based on how the standings are going so far.
Yep.
But it will be held in the Windy City in Chicago at SeatGeek Stadium.
You know, I saw this announced and I saw a lot of conflicting opinions on Twitter. A lot of people love it. A lot of people hate it. You know, maybe there's a few people in the middle. But it looks like the MLR is maybe going a little bit of that NFL route, Ryan, you know, like planning a site where a field where somebody already plays, not like a site that is outside of any of the home stadiums. And, you know, if that team happens to make it to the finals, then hey, it is what it is. They get to play at a home site. If they don't, then that's going to be the site for the finals. It seems like that's the route that they're going. I don't know how I feel about it. I like that Chicago's not too far away. You know, I think maybe we'll make an appearance there, Ryan. I'd love for us to be there. And SeatGeek Stadium definitely isn't one that is, you know, it isn't a stadium that we're going to be disappointed with, because that stadium is beautiful.
Yeah, it definitely looks good on the TV screen. I know one of our league members, Stephen Lowen, has been able to take a little visit out there to SeatGeek Stadium as well. He says it was a good time, so I can only imagine that being there in person would be absolutely fantastic. So yeah, it should be interesting stuff. I don't know how this really changes the dynamic of of the league. I don't know. I know historically in the past years, obviously it's been the leading team going into the match that gets home field advantage. Last year, obviously, New York hosted the final, not at their typical stadium, but at Red Bull Arena, which was pretty cool to see. But yeah, to kind of have this neutral site idea, it's going to be interesting. And I mean, I guess fans, regardless, will be able to kind of look ahead and be like, you know what, regardless of where it is, I know I can plan that I'm going to head out to Chicago to go see this match, which may play an advantage. And maybe you'll get a bigger turnout because of that, because people are able to plan in advance. So it should be an interesting thing moving forward. So yeah, Saturday, July 8th, MLR Championship for 2023 will be held in Chicago at SeatGeek Stadium. All right, shifting over quickly here to not a team that is currently in the league, but a team that is going to be in the league in 2024 to stick with the whole stadium mantra. The Miami Sharks are looking for their home, and it seems like they at least took their first glimpse of a possible home, and that is being FIU Stadium, Florida International University's facilities there. I believe Miami FC also plays at that stadium. And they posted a social media post of kind of the picture there. I mean, it's your typical kind of football stadium, artificial turf, has nice stadium seating, I believe around 23,000 people. A good option here for the Miami Sharks, should be interesting. I think I am kind of, despite kind of the multi-purpose turf field and kind of comparing it to other things, that's not my favorite. But seeing these venues in terms of the seating, you see what San Diego is doing, obviously how SeatGeek is doing, like we just mentioned. It is cool to kind of have these enclosed kind of multi-use facilities that have the kind of cool looking stadium around it that kind of showcases all that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it looks like a great stadium, but I guess, you know, along with looking at the stadiums, the Miami Sharks' new COO, Mariano Marco, got to work pretty quick and said, hey, we got to figure out the operating. First place we got to figure out is where the boys going to play. And I guess they're getting their search going quick, and hopefully, you know, it seems like they're very inclusive on getting fans' thoughts of where they're going to play, what jerseys they're going to wear, and I absolutely love it.
I will say kudos to the Miami Sharks for being really transparent to kick off their entry into the league. They've been, you know, really active on social media.
Yeah.
They've been sharing obviously everything that they've been doing up to this date. Something that
getting fan input, Ryan. You know that there's another team in the MLR that kind of struggled this year with getting fan input while rebranding their team and just kind of going with it. So I'm not going to name any names, but Rugby Atlanta, you know, maybe take some notes.
There you go. The shot that we always expect from good old Matt Yee. All right, let's shift over to the last news. Just something quick that we want to mention. Hasn't made an appearance in the 2023 MLR season yet, but he did make his last appearance in the 2022 final with then named Rugby New York, now the New York Ironworkers. But Eagles lock Nick Civetta has confirmed his retirement after playing 35 tests of professional rugby in Italy, England, France, and the USA. Just a guy that's been a staple of, I guess, American rugby, and of course, obviously, was a big part of that championship run for Rugby New York last season.
I was gonna say, most importantly, Ryan, he walks out as an MLR champion, holding that shield high. You know, a local New York guy got to win it with his home club pretty much. And I think Rugby Wrap Up tweeted it best. The guy gets to walk out on top as a champion. Can't do it any better than that.
Yeah. So congratulations to Nick Civetta.
Civetta, you know, I feel like he's got a little bit of that Italian in there.
Nick Civetta. Yeah, so congratulations to him and the wonderful career that he has had. And yeah, like you mentioned, Matt, walking off as a championship, an MLR championship to say the least, after winning that last year with Rugby New York. All right, you ready to kind of get excited here and talk a little bit about how you're doing in this league?
I've been waiting for this the whole intro. Let's go, Ryan.
All right, here we go. Here's the Commissioner Yee's league update. Hear ye, hear ye. Here is Commissioner Yee with the Fantasy Ruckers League update.
It keeps getting more tolerable, Ryan, the more I'm sitting on top of that table.
I know it's getting nuts here. I mean, the how you've turned the tables here, Matt, is absolutely insane. Going from, I guess, last place last season, to now. I mean, the season's not even close to being done yet, but the fact that you are sitting pretty here at the top of the league with by far the most number of points, and we mentioned it in your matchup this week against the guy that's been giving you probably the hardest time this offseason so far about the way that you struggled and all that. And you mentioned him, Rugby Morning. You were able to rack up a historical matchup against him, 114.3 points on the week, the most ever that we've seen in the Fantasy Ruckers League. I mentioned in the teaser, obviously this year is the year that we were able to introduce new stats. We were able to introduce tackles, meters gained, which has been an absolutely game changer for the way that strategy has been going forward with Fantasy MLR, and just being able to see guys rack up more points as a whole has been a whole lot of fun too. But yeah, 114.3 points, man, that is ridiculous.
Ryan, at some point here, you know, I'm almost starting to feel a little bad for the rest of the league. You know, I'm going to have to start getting off my high horse, getting off my mountain, you know, do some charity work, maybe eat some of that humble pie. You know, we'll see. Maybe the tides are going to change once I start getting used to winning. I don't know if I'm used to it yet, but we'll get there.
I don't know. It sounds like you're pretty used to it. But all right, let's break down some of these matchups. We mentioned it. Ruck and Roll beating Rugby Morning, 114.3 to 87.1. Fitzy putting up the second highest point total for Rugby Morning in the week, or I should say the third highest point total. Just wasn't enough to go against a triple-digit performance. And again, the first ever triple-digit performance in the history of the Fantasy Ruckers League. You got to give a shout out, like we mentioned, to Vandy. He was able to squeak out a win against Rugby Wrap Up, who has been at the top of the league with you there for quite some times, Matt. But he was able to squeak one out with a pretty solid performance, 70.7, 268. Now, we know that Rugby Wrap Up has a whole bunch of New York Ironworkers players on his team, and they were kind of questionable this past weekend. We're going to break down that match, obviously, but obviously he has a big dependence on how that team is performing. They didn't perform. Vandy took advantage of that, got the win there. Eagles overseas falling short to Dankus Anchors in what was a lower scoring matchup, 57.8 to 53.5. MLR stats taking on MLR All Access's team. Give me the Loots. An absolute thrashing here, 82.6 to 34.6. Now I will say MLR All Access does have a heavy reliance on Seattle Seawolves players. Seattle Seawolves players were on bye this past week. It is a tough go, but nonetheless, a big loss there for MLR All Access. A big win for MLR Stats. And then last matchup of the week here in round 5, at least from a fantasy perspective here in the Fantasy Ruckers League. Lads on Tour, the former MLR champion, the guy that still is the only guy that has his name etched on this jersey that is behind me. That is the prize possession for this Fantasy Ruckers League if you're able to bring home that championship. He was able to do it last year. He gets back in the win column, 97.4 points to Feral Hippies 67.4. So the standings now. This is where it all breaks down. Ruck and Roll, you are starting to pull away a little bit and separate yourself from the rest. You're sitting up there 4-1, right alongside Dankus Anchors, Hokie, and his squad. But the point total is not even close. 464.9 points total this entire season. That is the tiebreaker. Dankus Anchors has 352.2 points on the season. And I'm just going down the list here, Matt. You are 60 points higher or 50 points higher than the next team in terms of point total. That is very, very impressive. And that next team is Rugby Wrap Up, who sits in third place with a 3-2 record, 412.3 total fantasy points on the season, followed by Rugby Morning and Lads on Tour, who also share the 3-2 record. Then you shift on to MLR Stats, who also has the 3-2 record in that 6th spot. And then in 7th and 8th, you got Feral Hippies, Eagles Overseas, sitting with a 2-win and 3-loss record so far. Hey, Ruck and Go, moving up a little bit. He's racked up his first win, 1-4, not in last place anymore. And then MLR All Access having a tough time in their very first fantasy MLR season. They're sitting in last place, still looking for that very first win. But nonetheless, that is the latest in the Fantasy Ruckers League, and I think Matthew will play that segment on repeat here because he loves.
Oh yeah,
at the top.
I do love hearing it. Hey, I'm trying to see how many weeks I can stay up there. We'll see how it goes. But the nice thing I like to see, there's a lot of close records in that middle, and then there's a little bit of split at the ends. It's kind of, we're starting to see, I think, some of the teams starting to get it spread out a little bit. But I'm rooting for a Vandy comeback. Me and him have been talking. I think me and him are about to go on a roll.
I mean, it's not that far. I mean, right now, it's
a long season, right?
It is a long season. The last playoff spot, like we mentioned, 6 teams will make the playoffs here for the fantasy championship. And that mark right now is trying to get 3 wins. Again, that's not that much because like we said, the tides can turn very quickly when it comes to all of that. But yeah, it's exciting stuff, Matt. I can't believe you're doing what you're doing, and we'll see whether or not you can keep it going. But yeah, the Fantasy Ruckers League been exciting so far, and yeah, a whole lot of close battles here so far to start the season. I expect the same as we move on towards the season.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, it wasn't so close with Fitzy, but hey, next time, Fitzy, next time.
There you go. And then a quick thing before we kind of wrap up and start our breakdown into these past weekend's matches. I will say just keep an eye out for some eligibility changes moving forward. There are some players over this past week, especially as we grew on here and being 5 weeks into the season, like we mentioned, the eligibility rules, at least in our league, is if a player starts 3 spots at that position, he gains the eligibility. If he goes 3 weeks without starting at a certain position, he loses that eligibility. So some changes here so far. Guys like Mike Matarazzo gaining the second row eligibility, losing the back row eligibility. Brad Tucker gaining the back row, losing the second row. Mason Flesh, he's been able to flip-flop back and forth between positions, so he actually has both eligibilities now, second row, back row. Same with Ruida Biddle. Ruida Biddle also having now both the center and back 3 eligibility too. And then Marcos Young of Old Glory DC, he loses his center eligibility and gains the back 3 eligibility. So again, league managers, just make sure you're checking up on your rosters, looking at that fantasyruckers.com website, and really just making sure that everything suits to the par. I know that one of our league members had some concerns about kind of eligibility stuff. So if you guys do have any questions, please reach out to me, send me a DM on Discord, and we can try to get that all sorted for you. And that goes along with rules as well. I know that there's been some kind of rule clarifications that have been going on, at least in our league channel. So we'll make sure to get that all clarified for you guys as well. We hope to try to release a updated kind of document that will have everything kind of outlined for you guys too. But it's been a lot of fun so far as this league season keeps on going, and we'll see how it continues to shake out.
A true commissioner for the people, Ryan.
Yeah, exactly. That's what this segment is all about. All right, you ready to shift on and start talking about some matches this past week, Matt?
Let's get into it. This was an exciting week of matchups.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, well, let's get into the team that I guess has been making the biggest turnaround in the first 4 weeks of their, or I should say 5 weeks that they've played here. The NOLA Gold. After looking pretty poor their first 3 matches, these past 2 weeks have been looking electric. They took down Rugby New York in round 4, and I know Utah is not necessarily known as the strongest team here. Vandy might say different, being the in-house Utah fan, but NOLA taking advantage and winning 37-14 in a pretty dominant showing here at home against the Utah Warriors.
Yeah, I mean, look, they've heard my pleads. They've heard my everything that I could possibly throw at them to make them win the championship this year and follow up my prediction. These past 2 weeks are just confirming some of my thoughts. They look like a completely different team than the first 3 weeks. I think a big catalyst for that is Rodney Iona and the way that he's playing. He's been a lot more accurate with his kicks and his playmaking ability, and he's also showing that, he can attack the line as well. I think Nola Gold just kind of dominated this game. Utah had some sparks and flashes where they looked like they could come back and win this game potentially. Not really, but they had some offensive spark. But just Nola, they're too hot right now.
Yeah, and I will say this was a match, though, that even despite the low scoring on Utah's side with only the 14 points, from a fantasy perspective, it did seem like we had a whole bunch of fantasy performers all across the board here. Just a lot of things going on here. I'll start with Nola Gold's side. Some players that really stood out in this match. I mean, Tom Florence continues to do Tom Florence things.
Oh yeah.
He follows up a pretty solid showing in round 4 with another double-digit performance, 15.5 points, playing the full match, 94 meters gained, and again racking 17 tackles, and really without scoring a try there. This is a guy that is turning out to be a guy that you can really depend on each week if you put him in your starting lineup.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing, Ryan, is when you're starting to look at these guys who aren't scoring tries but still getting tons of points, that's when you know you've got a keeper on your hands, and that's somebody that you want to keep in your lineup. And Tom Florence is just clearly one of those guys.
Yeah. And then another guy I want to mention, JP Duplessis, starting to look like he's a guy that was worth that first round pick, Matt, when you selected him at the back end of that first round. 21 fantasy points, 83 minutes played, a try scored, 93 meters gained, 14 tackles as well. Just really an all-around performance. And you throw in a breakdown steal there too. Really a guy that attributed to that triple-digit performance of yours.
Ryan, I was watching that game and I see the clock tick down and I see the steal and the try all in the same play by JP Duplessis. If there was a broken tackle stat, he broke about 6 of them on that one try. But this kind of the play, we talked about Tom Florence and JP Duplessis right after each other. Like 3 minutes before the try happened, I see Tom Florence kind of push JP Duplessis out of the way so that he could be the first ball carrier. And I just see JP Duplessis just get so mad and just like, what are you doing? Why are you pushing me out of the way? And I guess, hey, thank you, Tom Florence, because that motivated him to go steal the ball and get a try. Can't thank him enough for that.
Yeah, other guys I'll throw out there because there's a whole list here on this Nola side.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're throwing up 37 total points, there's going to be a whole bunch of fantasy point performers. We got Cale Hodgson, who's pretty good, 13.9 points for him. He added a try in there. I do want to stick on here a little bit with Luke Campbell. Luke Campbell, back-to-back weeks now scoring a try, 11.3 fantasy points, which may not sound like a lot, but from a scrum half position, I think that's pretty solid. Played the over 70 minutes played, so we got that bonus there. Like I said, added the try, but also 8 tackles as well. I mean, it really seems that this is a guy that ever since that he took over this starting role, I don't think it's a coincidence that that's when Nola really started to win, in addition to Rodney Iona kind of starting to perform as well, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's really, you got to attribute it to both of them, but the fact that they're able to get go forward ball, and Luke Campbell is a guy who runs really great support lines, and that's why I had him at the top 5 of my rankings. The fact that he's able to get go forward ball and be that guy to run support lines on those line breaks, it just gives him more of an opportunity to not just get tries, but also get meters gained.
Absolutely. Other guys, Pat O'Toole, we always love the big boys getting points here. 15.2 fantasy points for him. 78 meters gained at the front row position is pretty solid. Malcolm May is a guy that also racked up 14.1 points, 13 tackles, added the try in there as well. And then also Jack Webster was a guy that also did pretty solid too.
Yep, a late substitution there, and he came on and showed why he should be in that starting lineup.
Yeah, 14 and a half fantasy points in there. I believe replacing Jordan Trainer, who didn't end up showing up in that matchup here. And then just shifting on to the Utah side, like we said, they only scored 14 points, but still pretty solid showings by a few guys here on Utah. I mean, Mika Kruse, 21.6 fantasy points, scoring a try, 124 meters gained.
Yeah.
This is a guy that out of 3 out of 4 times that he's played has racked up over 15 fantasy points. Mika Kruse is electric there on the Utah Warriors.
Yeah, I mean, he was the guy that was, when I said that Utah had some sparks of offense, he was the offense that was the spark. He was just, he found a way to break the line. He found a way to get a lot of meters gained and start getting some momentum on that offensive side. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. But yeah, he continues to be a guy that Utah can rely on, and also fantasy managers can rely on too, to rack up some points.
Yeah. Joel Hodgson, too, 16.4 fantasy
Yeah.
points, adding 2 conversion kicks. 92 meters gained from the fly half position is pretty solid. Throwing a
Oh
try
yeah.
assist and 9 tackles. That's pretty solid for him. Henry Bell doing pretty good work there. 10.7 fantasy points.
Look at those
The
tackles.
big one, yeah, the big one is the 22 tackles that he was able to rack up, which again is really attributes to the consistency. And then Lance Williams, he was the one of the try scorers for Utah. Not many meters gained, which you would normally expect from Lance
Yeah.
Williams, but did supplement that with 15 tackles. So not the best performance there, but one of the more key guys there on the Warriors.
Yeah, a couple guys that I'll just throw out is Thomas Tuaval, 23 tackles and 59 meters gained. That's a great stat line from back row. That's something that you'd love to see. That's a couple back-to-back good weeks and double-digit weeks. So, or one double-digit week and one high single-digit week. You'll take those. And then also Joe Mano. I know that I don't think the fantasy points showed as much of the way that he was involved. He only got 9.2 points, but he continues to be a big involvement in that offense and also has a lot of opportunities to kind of break the line and be able to rack up those points.
Yeah, so it's been very interesting to see how NOLA has been turning these matchups around because now they're on back-to-back wins. They're going to take on Old Glory DC away, which will be interesting in round 6, which we'll obviously break down. But yeah, NOLA seems like it went from very, very dark days to now very, very bright days, and all these guys are looking like top fantasy performers. I mean, if I had told you after like week 1 or week 2 that we'd be listing 7 different guys here on NOLA that were all fantasy relevant, we were almost at a point, Matt, where we were talking about maybe not playing your NOLA Gold guys. But yeah, apparently not you.
Not me.
I don't know. I don't know if we're an upside down world or whatever. Like it's crazy because everything that you're saying is essentially coming to an existence, and whatever you're using or whatever good luck stuff you have going on or voodoo stuff that you're working on, you got to throw that maybe a little my way because it seems like everything you're saying is definitely getting put into existence.
All I can do is shrug, Ryan. I just got to keep shrugging. That's all I can do.
Keep shrugging. All right. Let's move on to the second matchup of the Saturday. Rugby Atlanta taking on the San Diego Legion at home.
Statement game.
Yeah, a statement game by San Diego. I think really showing off the team that they've shown in the past. I mean, we talked about their performance against the New England Free Jacks earlier. What they've been able to do throughout the entirety of the season so far. 35-10 dominant victory over Rugby Atlanta. Again, we mentioned this. I don't think Rugby Atlanta has really proven to me yet that they're really the team that has been the team that we know of in the past. They're not the same team that made it to the MLR final before. It does seem like Atlanta has taken a step back here in 2023. Yeah,
I mean, it just looks like they don't have that same, they have flashes of really great offensive patterns and offensive, ability. But just, when you're facing some of those top sides like San Diego, it really shows what kind of team you are. And San Diego just made a statement with this win over Atlanta.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about some fantasy performers in this one. We'll start.
Quick thing, Ryan. We're going to talk a lot about the San Diego backline, I think. And I just want to say that at the start, when the offseason, we're seeing all these signings that they were making, and we're seeing this backline kind of start coming together and really gelling. And that backline has to be looked at as one of the best in the league. I think not enough people are talking about them, but the way that they operate, the way that they're made up, regardless of who's at 10, that backline is able to get things done and be a threat.
I mean, all the backs for San Diego all past the 50-meter gain threshold. You talk about Nate Augsburger, 71 meters gain, Maa Nanu, 64, Marcel Brackey, 53, Thomas Aoki, 106, Mike Teo, 60. I mean, Will Hooley, obviously more of a distributor, only racking him 13, but even Richard Judd getting in on the fun as well. I mean, 45 meters gained, 2 tries scored there. So let's start it right there. He was probably one of the biggest performers for this team at this position. 15.8 fantasy points, playing that full match there. Like I said, racking up the 2 tries. Richard Judd, he might be one of the steals that you picked up there, especially as a replacement for a guy that drafted Nate Augsburger, who was supposed to be a scrum half, who's no longer a scrum half, and now you do have a scrum half.
I mean, look, I told you guys last week that this guy is the best serviced in the league from the way that I look at it. And, the way that he services the ball is showing how well his backline can be. It helps that offense when you have a 9 that can give you good ball. And clearly their offense is looking real good and he's benefiting from it.
Absolutely. And then we'll shift over to Thomas Aoki. I mean, he's coming now with 3 double-digit fantasy point performances in a row.
Yeah.
In round 5 against Rugby Atlanta, 17.6 fantasy points, 106 meters gained. You throw on a try on top of that. This is a guy that looks like he's going to be a staple in your fantasy lineup moving forward until something changes.
Yeah, I mean, we were trying to figure out who the heck was going to be that back three at the start of the season, and Thomas Aoki or Aoaki, either one, he's really showing that he doesn't necessarily need the tries to put up the numbers because he's getting those meters gained, he's getting opportunities with the ball constantly, and when he does, he's electric.
And then I will mention, I will give a shout out, I guess. I mean, those were the big performers, but I'll give a shout out to the bench players for San Diego. I mean, you're getting 2 tries off the bench. Obviously, it was against a Rugby Atlanta team that, towards the end, it's a more dominant style for San Diego. But Nathan Sylvia, Dan Pryor, both adding tries there towards the later end of the match. So kudos to them. But I guess from a fantasy perspective, that's a little bit tough because obviously you're not going to be starting players that are coming off the bench. So to see that point production coming there, kind of lost points there for our league and for our fantasy managers. But nonetheless, big time performance by San Diego. Richard Judd, Thomas Aoki, two big guys, and we mentioned that back line who maybe didn't have the most over the top performances, but you can see the consistency there in teams of meters gained.
I do want to shout out Ryan quickly, Nanu, a guy who hasn't really had fantasy relevant for us, especially last year when you're relying on tries.
Right.
And even this year when, I don't think he's as much of a guy you look at for a lot of carry meters, but more of a guy who's kind of distributing the ball. Which has been a skill that he's picked up later in his career back in New Zealand and here. Mm-hmm. I think this guy is integral to the offense. The way that not only he's showing this year that he can carry the ball, break the line, and create space for others at the same time, it's just incredible for that San Diego backline, and he's the catalyst there. And, you're going to get your flashes sometimes, or it's going to show on the fantasy stats. And, getting a high single digits this week, I think is something that you like out of him.
I will say one of the biggest conversations I think moving forward with this San Diego team is what we're going to be seeing at this 10 position. Obviously, Will Hooley has been the starter over the past couple weeks here after Josh Henderson has been dealing with injury there.
Yeah, he came back on the bench this week, but still Hooley. Why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If Hooley's in there steering the ship well, putting up 33 points, or 35 points, then, why fix it there?
Yeah, so I mean, it should be interesting to see how that plays out. That will be something that the managers of both fly halves should be looking out for, how they're going to approach that moving forward. Because I could definitely see a world where Josh Henderson gets back into the mix of things, because he was the one that was starting towards the beginning of the season before Will Hooley came in. But then again, at the same time, last year we saw what Will Hooley was able to do towards the tail end or in parts of last year, and it was definitely something that was exciting as well. So going to be interesting there to see how that plays out. Going over to Rugby Atlanta side, again, not a really that great of a performance there by Rugby Atlanta as a whole. The only guy that I really want to kind of outline is Will Leonard. He's a guy that was at the center position, a guy that's been kind of receiving a little bit of criticism from this fantasy world because he was kind of picked a little bit higher. There was expectation at the center position that he was going to be pretty solid, and hasn't really been doing that. In round 5, it was the first time he cracked the double-digit point threshold, and a large part of that was due to the 22 tackles that he was able to rack up, which is pretty impressive. You would like to see the meters gained kind of go up a little bit more. He hasn't surpassed 67 meters yet this season. This past match, he was only able to get 44. Not what you're really hoping from a center position, but I think there is opportunity here for Will Leonard to get back in the fold here of being fantasy relevant and being someone that you can rely on in your fantasy lineups.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the trouble is that, in a game where maybe they didn't have the ball as much and they were forced to play a lot of defense, is that something that you're going to have to rely on for Will Leonard to that type of game for him to have a big week? Because I really do think that Rewood is kind of the center that has taken over the ball carrying duties. and a guy that just look at that unreal try that they scored, a guy that they kind of rely on to get them go forward ball. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. On Rugby Atlanta, though, another guy I just want to throw out there is Jason Dan. This guy is, 4 weeks in a row, continues to have double-digit weeks, regardless of how the team is performing. Jason Dan, definitely the fantasy managers have him. This guy's a keeper for sure.
Yeah, fair enough. 13.4 fantasy points on this season, 63 meters gained, 17 tackles, add a breakdown steal. He's had double-digit scoring in every single match that he's played so far this season. So pretty impressive stuff. He's also the top point scorer by far for this Rugby Atlanta team. So in 2023, as of this point. All right, let's shift over to the next matchup. Probably one of the more exciting matchups this weekend. And
we don't talk about Dallas often, Ryan. This one we're going to get into it.
Yeah, we don't talk about Dallas and definitely Chicago has been struggling too. And what was funny going into this matchup was that obviously one of these teams was going to come out with their very first victory in franchise history. And it did end up being the Chicago Hounds squeaking out a win in the final minutes of the match. I believe it was Chris Mattina who was able to hit that last penalty kick, right? And get them over the hump there, 24-22, and then the final minutes for Dallas just very, very tough.
Ryan, Dallas was so close. One pick and go. The guy runs isolated. I saw him pick him up. I saw him pick the ball up. I saw him go into tackle, and I said, "That's it. That's a steal. Game's over." It was heartbreaking. I wanted to see Dallas win so bad. I'm happy to watch Chicago struggle for a little bit. So first year in the league, Dallas has seen enough.
Right.
Dallas has been through enough. Dallas has fallen off from the highest of highs of a scaffolding and fallen all the way to the ground, right? And I just wanted to see these guys win. And it was just heartbreaking to have them have a game like that against a team like Chicago who, got all their guys back, with Dominguez back, has Billy Meeks back. It was heartbreaking to watch that last few minutes.
Yeah, definitely tough for Dallas. So they'll still look for their first victory in franchise history. But let's talk about kind of Chicago players here. We talked about the rough, obviously, outing that they had in round 4 against the Toronto Arrows in terms of that center back line that was really kind of struggling. You expected some of these guys to rack up these meters that they've historically done, but this week they were able to get right back at it. I mean, Bill Meeks 143 meters gained, Mark O'Keefe 132, Bryce O'Campbell 90 meters gained, and like I mentioned, Chris Mattina, who I think was probably the most impactful player for the Chicago Hounds this past week.
Yeah, for sure.
He definitely made a statement there with his 163 meters gained, 17.3 fantasy points, and obviously slotting in that penalty kick at the end there as well. Yeah, just overall a really, really good stuff by them. So
Ryan, this was the back line that we've been waiting to see, and I know you've been waiting to see blow up, and we've been hyping up a lot. And finally, 5 weeks in, they've all came to play against the Dallas Jackals.
I mean, it took them to play the Dallas Jackals to get it there.
But hey, Dallas Jackals played well. But yeah, I guess we'll see. You do make a good point. We'll see if they can keep this up against their next week opponent.
Yeah, Mark O'Keefe, 132 meters gained, 1 try, 6 tackles to amount to a 20 fantasy point performance. We also got Bill Meeks, who I'm sure Rugby Morning, who drafted him as kind of a steal towards the tail end of the 4th round flip. He was able to come out with a big time performance here, 18.7 fantasy points, 143 meters gained. Definitely something that you wanted to see after what was a rough debut in a Chicago Hounds jersey for him in round 4, at least from a fantasy perspective. And then, we got to mention Julian Dominguez, 2 tries, 19.1 fantasy points, 83 meters gained. This guy is an animal, especially coming off the injury. Pretty impressive stuff for Julian Dominguez with Chicago there. Anyone else on the Hounds side that you want to mention before I shift on over to Dallas?
I do want to talk quickly just about Luke Carty. I think this is a guy that, Ryan, you have been waiting to see, really show up. The guy finally puts up double-digit points this week. And I thought he had a pretty good game. So yeah, I mean, it's great to see him starting to trend up, and hopefully be one of the fly halves that fantasy managers can rely on.
Yeah, 11.6 fantasy points, 57 meters gained, and then you add 2 penalty kicks in there as well.
Yeah. Only in 68 minutes, too.
Yeah, only in 68 minutes. That is true. All right, shifting over to Dallas. Again, it was a weird one. This was not really one that really had any outstanding fantasy performers on this side because
No.
all the try scorers were obviously guys that didn't really do anything else but that in terms of a perspective.
Yeah.
But I will say, and it's not often that I bring it up, but I mean the Dallas Jackals set piece. I mean, this was a week that they epitomized basically the entire what a set piece you want a set piece to do. They racked up 8 fantasy points based off
Yeah.
of three try assists, got the offensive bonus point with the 4
Yep.
tries scored in the match, and then the defensive bonus point as well. So despite losing, at least from a fantasy perspective, that's how you maximize the points. So really can't get any better there from a set piece performance by the Dallas Jackals. The forward pack, I guess, doing really, really good stuff there in that matchup against Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, 3 tries this, and maybe that's them finding their strength, them finding out what they need to do to stay close in games. And they were just dominant in that game. Every time they got into Chicago's end, every time they had a chance to maul it, they took that chance and they wanted to score. That's how they wanted to do it. And nobody can blame them, especially anybody. I don't even know if anybody owned the Dallas Jackals set piece this week.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, take it with a grain of salt because it is against a struggling Chicago team. So I'm
Yeah.
not too sure if you're going to be able to jump on a Dallas Jackals team that's going to be racking up 3 try assists anytime soon. But hey, it is something to look out for because if that's something they start to emphasize moving forward, that will be something that despite them not being necessarily the strongest defense or the strongest team out there, if they're putting that much emphasis on the set piece, you could be racking up these try assists on a weekly basis. That would give you a huge advantage.
Yep.
Anything else with this matchup? Or exciting one there, and congratulations to
exciting
Charlotte
one.
Hounds for racking up their first win.
I do want to just bring up a conversation piece of Sam Gola. I mean, this guy, I think, has been on the team of the week like 3 out of the 5 weeks. And as a rookie, a guy who we definitely didn't expect a lot of coming into the year. No, he hasn't put up crazy fantasy numbers, but the guy is a guy that we thought wasn't even going to be rostered. And now he's definitely a guy who you want on your team because he has the ability to, even though the Dallas Jackals team is not the greatest and isn't going to rack up that many wins, he's out there getting the fantasy points, doing the fantasy relevant work, and at the end of the day, doing the rugby relevant work to help out his squad.
And I mean, from the second row position that we talked about earlier in the off season about how you really can't expect much point production from the second row position. This is a guy that's kind of breaking that mold. I mean, you're
He's the
obviously
top scorer at the second row.
you're gonna have up and down weeks with this guy, but I mean, he has 2 double-digit performances. He's racked up double-digit tackles every single week. Yeah, it's a guy that that is definitely making moves here, especially as a rookie. And from the top of my head, I don't think there's any rookie, especially from a fantasy perspective, that's making the impact that he has. Like, he's a clear-cut number 1 pick. And obviously, a lot of that is because Dallas is giving him the opportunity to do that. I don't know if as many other teams are really giving that same opportunity to their rookies like Dallas is giving Sam Gola.
True.
I mean, first things that come to mind, I mean, we haven't seen as much of Caldy Martinez with Old Glory DC. We haven't
seen a little bit of Alani, a little bit, but Damian Stevens was back in the lineup this week.
We haven't seen much of Owen Rudden either with that.
I mean, he got his first cap this week, and it's 5 weeks in.
Yeah,
right?
we haven't seen much of Seth Purdy. So kind of guys aren't getting that same, I guess, chunk of playing time as Sam Gola, not even close to it. And I think that more probably speaks on to the situation that Dallas was in why they were picking Sam Gola and having him slotted in there. But nonetheless, I think just as much credit needs to go to Gola for taking advantage of the opportunity and definitely making an impact here, both on the actual rugby field and also in a fantasy perspective as well, which is pretty cool stuff to see as a rookie coming straight into the league and making the waves that he's making.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's shift on over to the night matchups of the weekend. We got Old Glory DC. I guess that was also at 7:00, but Old Glory DC wrapping
What are we
up
doing,
Saturday.
Ryan? We can't have 2 matches at 7 p.m. You know how difficult it is to watch, especially, I don't know if you saw this, Ryan, but especially when we're going through on Fox, and Fox 2 is telling me that they're going to be switching to the Fox app.
Yeah.
And then I figure out what's going on Fox 2, and it's the Pro Bowling Association. Yeah, bowling is electric, but I think that's got to say something about the MLR when we're getting replaced by bowling.
Well, what I heard was that what happens is that because they're on Fox Sports 2, I believe because the NASCAR was on
Okay.
Fox Sports 1
That's big.
and it got bumped, because that gets bumped because it runs long, that gets shifted over to Fox Sports 2, which automatically
Oh,
shifts to MLR.
no.
So a little bit tough there, but nonetheless, yeah, I did see that, and that is tough to see, and definitely not a good look for the MLR. But yeah, well, anyways, let's talk.
It was hard for me to watch Toronto get their butts whooped.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. Old Glory DC with a dominant victory, 29-3. It could have been a whole lot worse.
Oh, yeah.
I think the Arrows really were making just a whole bunch of mistakes, and really didn't deserve to get anything out of this matchup. Old Glory DC definitely could have put this point total even higher on this team, for sure. But nonetheless, yeah, I mean, Toronto's struggling right now. Old Glory DC back home takes advantage of a struggling team, not their best performance, but nonetheless, you have to give kudos to them for taking advantage of a struggling Arrow squad.
Yeah, I mean, look, Toronto, one, they're running through injury trouble again. They continue to run through injury trouble. I don't know what's happening over there. Somebody please just get them a Band-Aid of some sort.
I mean, it can't be easy to also be on the road for the first 5 matches.
That is true. That is true. But it just, for them, like, offensively, and this is where the real fantasy manager, you have to really figure out what you want to do with your Toronto players, because offensively, they don't know how to convert in the red zone. They don't know how to convert in the other team's 22. They continue to get down there. So yes, they're going to get meters gained, but they just are making mistakes in their end, and it's just causing them to throw away chances. And that's what you see on the scoreboard. You know, they finish out with just a Sam Malcolm penalty, the guy who carried them through the last game and carried them through this L in this game. It's just, it's hard to watch, and it puts you in a really tight spot when you have Toronto Arrows players in your lineup.
Yeah, and really the only players that I'm really looking at this point from a Toronto Arrows side, because we'll get into the conversation now, might as well, because there wasn't really anyone fantasy relevant from this Toronto side this week. I think moving forward, I think that's where the more discussion is because fantasy managers are probably worried about, if they do have Toronto guys, what the heck am I doing here? You're playing Sam Malcolm because he's going to have his down weeks, but with the boot that he has, he always has the potential of being able to score you a whole bunch of points, especially coming off of a week where he scored all the points for Toronto against Chicago and was able to get the full house and do all that stuff all on his own. I'm looking at the Toronto centers because at least I'm not as try reliant there. I'm going to get the meters gain. I'm going to get the tackles, and then I'm looking at back row positions.
Yeah, and we got to watch out for Tuala Tassi. He looked like he went down with a knee injury that didn't look great. So we'll have to see how that goes. And also, how does that impact the next centers coming up? Does that mean Fabian Goodall moves into that spot? We've seen him play there, and we like him as well.
But at least from a roster construction standpoint, those are the positions I'm looking at.
Yeah,
I don't want anything to do with the back threes of Toronto. I don't want anything to do with the front rows or the second rows of that. I want guys that can get me consistent points, and those stat categories that are getting you consistent points are tackles and meters gained, and that happens from the center position, and that happens from the back row position.
I mean, part of me even says the back row isn't even, for the Toronto Arrows, isn't even one that you want to touch.
Sure. I mean, the only guy there's Lucas Rumble.
Yeah, and I mean, even him, he had a decent last week. But you look at the couple weeks before where they struggled, and you know, it's a tough go for those guys. So yeah, it's a tough one when you have your Toronto Arrows players. There's not many guys to choose from.
All right, let's shift over now to Old Glory DC because there were some fantasy relevant guys on this side of the ball.
Oh, yeah.
I want to talk about Tito Diaz-Bonilla because what this guy, and this is not going to get shown in the fantasy side of things, but his kicking, out of hand kicking in this matchup was incredible. The 50-22s that he was able to slot, there was one of them that was gorgeous. It landed right on the sideline and was perfect. Only I should say, but a decent showing of 13.8 fantasy points, 76 meters gained, 3 conversion kicks, a penalty kick there as well. But you can see the impact that he is having with this Old Glory DC side, especially when they need to put on big time performances and get that win here at home against Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, the commentators in the game said this as well, and I think a really big thing for them was just the way that he was able to, with the kicking, like you said, Rye, being able to control the tempo of the game, right? Being able to control this is the pace that they want to play at. This is how they are going to play. They're going to keep the territory. They're going to keep pushing you back. And he knows when he's going to attack, when he needs to distribute, and when he wants to put you on the back foot. It was just an incredible game by him. He's definitely was kind of the Old Glory DC catalyst on that team, and he drove them to that win.
Another player I want to mention, Tavita Nakali. I mean, 17 fantasy points from a second row position, 92 meters gained, 16
What a
tackles.
beast.
Doesn't even add a try there. That was a pretty big time performance. Jamison Falanana Schultz too. I mean, you could probably argue from a fantasy perspective. I know this was the battle between Falanana Schultz and Rumble, the first time they've met.
Well, I was going to say, another good thing, he didn't punch anybody, and he definitely didn't punch Captain Canada. So, I'm happy about that. I'm happy for his performance.
Yeah, 17.1 fantasy points, 77 meters gained, a try assist as well, and 18 tackles. So that definitely was a big time performance there. Marcos Young, who we talked about with the eligibility part of things, now full-time back three player, 18.4 fantasy points, 91 meters gained, a try, and 11 tackles. Pretty impressive there by him. And then I do want to mention William Talataina as well. 12 fantasy points, but I think the big thing for me, he started at the back three position last week. He clearly struggled at that back three position. Back in the center position that we saw him more of last season. Did pretty good with it. 52 meters gained, a try in there as well, and 6 tackles. So something to keep an eye on, how that shift to the center position. Not sure it's going to stay, but that could have an impact on his fantasy production moving forward.
Yeah, 100%. Just another quick guy, Nick Suchon. The guy continues to get involved. The guy continues to sit at the back of that sit at the back of that maul and just kind of ride it right into the end zone. He also gets a lot of tackles, and that's exactly what you love out of your front row. And I'm definitely enjoying him on my team.
Yeah, no kidding. And Nick Suchon, the third highest fantasy point scorer for the Old Glory DC. 3 out of 4 weeks has scored double-digit scoring, which is crazy to think as a front row position. 12.8 fantasy points this past week, obviously with the try, behind the try, and 18 tackles to tack on top of that. So, Suchon definitely taking advantage of that Old Glory DC set piece. Anyone else in this matchup? Again, no one on the Toronto side. Old Glory DC heavily weighted. Time to move on to this last Sunday matchup.
Sure is.
All right.
I mean, this one was wild, Ryan. This one I did not expect the game to go the way that it did.
No, and I think the score kind of reflects not as bad as it could have been. I mean, the New England Free Jacks absolutely dominated this match, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They beat New York at home 33-18. Really, from a fantasy perspective, not really anyone that flashed on the New York Ironworkers side. A lot of it was on the New England Free Jacks side. Didn't think it was going to be this lopsided for sure.
Yeah, I mean, New England Free Jacks just came out with this defensive mentality and just suffocated the New York team. Yes, the New York team still was able to put up 18 points, but the way that the New England Free Jacks were able to control this game with line speed, it was just something great to watch, and I expect other teams to also try and do this as well until New York basically figures out how they can combat it. And I think the big guy, as we kind of get to the players, the big guy to look at is Ed Fido. You look at him, he was really silenced this week, right? I don't know whether he just wasn't part of New York's game plan. We didn't see a lot of those those Ed Fido crashes right off set piece coming off the wing. I was surprised to see that. I would love to see them get back to that. But it was definitely an interesting week from him just because you expect double digits from him, and he got, nothing really.
Yeah, lowest point total this season so far, by far. Only 5.8 fantasy points by him after racking up double-digit performances in every single week up to this point. Definitely not the performance you wanted to see from Ed Fido, the number 1 pick in our fantasy MLR draft, and definitely benefited you when you were facing who owns him. Nick Feeks, though, made his first appearance for the New York Ironworkers, and he was kind of, I guess, the Ed Fido of this matchup because he was able to rack up 107 meters gained, 6 tackles, 13.5 fantasy points. But out of all the players on New York, that was probably as good as it gets. And I want to shift over to more of New England's players here, because there were definitely more guys on that side of the ball that were more fantasy relevant.
Well, yeah, maybe quickly before we move on, just Andrew Coe, friend of the show, guy that we love to talk about, got hurt in the first minute into the game. HIA, got sent off, didn't come back in. Don't worry, people. Vandy, you especially, texted him. He let me know he'll be back after the bye week next week. He'll be all good to go. He just got it stitched up. Doesn't need anything else.
Absolutely. Good to hear from that. Yeah, always worrisome when you see those HIA stuff. I feel like there's a bunch of those that weekend. I mean,
Yeah.
Kurt Baker also
Oh yeah, that
dealing
was
with that.
scary.
That was a scary one. So it's good to hear. And I know he has emailed me. And we know that he'll be back in. And
Emailed you, Ryan.
we got connections.
Right.
So we know that he'll be.
That guy's an All Black Sevens player. You know that?
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, just a lot of that. So we're obviously wishing the best for those guys when they deal with that HIA stuff because it's always dangerous stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, let's talk about these New England Free Jacks side. Paula Bellicana.
Ryan, holy cow.
Back-to-back weeks with double tries.
Holy cow, Ryan.
18.6 fantasy points, 82 meters gained. This guy, I think, is starting to move here with this New England Free Jacks offense.
Ryan, week 2, what did I tell everybody? He was on the free agent list. He was on the waiver wire. I said, pick this guy up. This guy is about to go off. Mm-hmm. Look what he's doing, Ryan. Look what he's doing.
Speaking into existence.
There we go. And it's just ridiculous. 4 tries in 2 games. He's just a finisher. He doesn't even need that much space. He just finishes plays. And it seems like New England knows that, and they're using him to finish off as many plays as they can.
Yeah. And then the other guy that I kind of want to mention, Wayne Vanderbank, continues to start doing good things. I mean, scores his first try of the season this past match, 90 meters gained, totaling a 17.1 fantasy points. So, yeah, good stuff by Wayne Vanderbank there this past weekend.
Yeah, I'll bring up a couple guys, and maybe it's their 2 fly halves or 2 supposed fly halves, Jason Potros and Reese McDonald. Jason Potros, I thought, really controlled the game for the New England Free Jacks. He also, did what fly halves and kickers are supposed to do and slotted every possible kick that he could. Only missed, I think, 1 on the day. And Reese McDonald in that fullback position really is looking comfortable back there, and really is starting to put up some points. Fantasy wise, and starting to get meters gained. I think he's just going to continue to get more comfortable with that fullback position. He's really helped that team by being there.
Yeah, Potros, 12.3 fantasy points for him. Obviously, again, a lot of that coming off of the boot, and then looking at Reese McDonald here.
Back-to-back 10-point weeks.
Yeah, back-to-back 10-point weeks, 10.4 here, 103 meters gained. So yeah, I mean, 2 guys that are definitely getting more and more consistent here moving forward at those positions. But yeah, interesting week of fantasy, man. And obviously there were kind of up and downs, but I think really just as we move on to some waiver wire pickup guys, the big thing from this weekend that really kind of highlighted to me was just the disparity between kind of games that are really, really fantasy relevant. Like you look at Nola Gold versus the Utah Warriors, how even though it was kind of a blowout one side, you still were having a lot of fantasy relevant guys on both sides of the ball. And then you look at kind of like a blowout like Rugby Atlanta, San Diego Legion, Old Glory DC, Toronto Arrows, Iron Workers, and New England Free Jacks. Just really not much on the other end when you got just so much going on the one side. So just kind of interesting to kind of look at that and see how these games really complement, I guess, the fantasy side of things, because it's not always a one-to-one kind of reflection of that, which is kind of unique.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, let's shift on over now to our waiver wire segment. Again, last week it was Houston that was on bye and the Seattle Seawolves on bye. Ironically, the two, I would argue, the top teams, if not in the league, definitely in the West, were off. So you'll have all those players returning, coming back in round 6. So keeping that in mind for this waiver wire
and we
segment.
got the New York Ironworkers on bye this week and the San Diego Legion on bye this week. So got to keep that in mind too, depending on who you want to pick up.
Exactly. And just to give a quick update to our top 5 players in the world of fantasy MLR right now. So Ed Fido still at the top there. Obviously, when you're putting up 15+ point performances, if you have one 5-point performance in there, not really going to hurt you that much. Even with the bye, Duncan Matthews still sits there at that 2nd position.
Riker Hadding,
still up there in that 3rd position. JP Duplessis-Matt making his waves up there. Up into
Ryan,
the
that
4th
top
position.
5 looks like a lot of my team.
It does, doesn't it? And it's ironic because I think Rugby Morning was saying something about that the week before, but it seems like you've pushed yourself up there a little bit. So interesting there, and that rounds out with Nate Oxberger, who you also have on.
I sure do.
There. So let's talk about some waiver wire guys. I think the top guy that people are probably going to be talking about here is Marcos Young. I mean, he's coming off a big-time performance. He started at the back 3 position here, past 3 weeks in a row, and is seeming to make a bigger and bigger impact. And he's coming off of an almost 20-point performance here. Obviously, it was against the Toronto Arrows, but he is a guy that you may want to look out for.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the waiver wire coming into this, Ryan, and it's a slim one this week. I think there's a lot of guys that have been picked up. I think there's only a handful of guys that maybe you want to take, and honestly, the guys that you're picking up are going to be just to fill in for guys that are on bye, or take flyers, and not really guys that are going to win you the league. Yes, Fandy, I can find league winners this early. Sorry, I just had to make sure that he understood that. Yeah. One guy I like is Thomas Tuivasa. I actually think, him as a back row, if you need a back row this week, I think Thomas Tuivasa is definitely going to be a guy that you can look at. They're facing the Arrows this week. So another thing you can look at is almost as similar to the way that the guys are facing Dallas Jackals. It might be a really good streamer for this week to plug into your lineup.
Yeah, but you're right about that. Not many guys that are gonna win you any weeks on their own, that's for sure.
And there's, I see a lot of, there's a few Chicago guys in there that maybe you want to take a look at. Just remember, they're playing the Seattle Seawolves this week. We know what happens when teams play the Seattle Seawolves. Even look at the centers that are on that Chicago Islanders team. Yeah, they had a good week last week, but they're gonna have a tough time against the Seattle Seawolves team. So I would probably stay away from that Chicago squad as well.
And again, I think at this point of the waiver wire in this season is really looking at guys who are getting opportunity on decent teams. I mean, that's why I bring up a guy like Marcos Young, because he is getting opportunity. He started the past 3 matches. He played the full 80 minutes this past week. I would assume that probably the Kurt Baker injury probably had a little bit to say about him playing the full 80 minutes, which definitely is something to keep in mind. But definitely just keep on looking at guys that are staying on the field for longer periods and are getting these starts, because if you have the space on your roster, it wouldn't hurt to kind of have these guys on the back end of your roster if you have the space, so that you have them when they do explode, and they're a guy that you're like, hey, wait, this is a guy that really is a lot better than what the fantasy stats are telling me. He just hasn't scored, let's say, a try yet or had that kind of explosive game, but they are getting the opportunity. That's definitely something to keep in mind moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe opposite to what you're saying, especially about the decent team, but maybe speaks more to the opportunity, is when you look at that Toronto backline now and you really look at some of those injuries. I believe Noel Reed left that game early as well, along with Tuala Tassi. Let's look at Fabian Goodall. I mean, he could potentially be a streamer and get a lot of opportunity with the ball in hand. He actually looked really good when he came in from center off the wing. If he's at wing or on center, I think the guy is just, he's a threat.
Yeah, Avery Oideman too. I mean, I know that we said stay away from the back 3 players, but I think just because of the explosiveness that we know that Avery Oideman can have and what he's done in the past, he may be a guy that you want to take a flyer on. I wouldn't really put anything there, but again, injuries dealing with there. He did play he was the de facto guy when he came in for that Noel Reed injury. Yeah. And he was able to make the most of it, because he did still rack up 93 meters gained and was able to hit double-digit fantasy points. So, and
Ryan, look, I said it before, we're taking streamers this week. If you think that they're going to do well this week, you take it, you drop them at the end of the week.
All right. Well, you ready to shift on to round 6 and look ahead and make some predictions here, buddy?
Let's do it. Let's see how many I can get wrong.
All right. Let's see what we can do. All right. Opening up the weekend is Old Glory DC taking on the NOLA Gold. This one should be a very interesting one, especially with how the standings are playing out here in the Eastern Conference. Very, very tight, especially with the struggles that the New York Ironworkers are dealing with. Yeah. Obviously, the New England Free Jacks are kind of solidifying their position at the top, but again, they're only 1 win up against some of these teams. So Old Glory DC taking on the NOLA Gold at home. This one should be an interesting one. I think we're going to learn a lot about both of these teams heading into this matchup.
Yeah, no, I think this is going to be a really good one. I think that we're going to see if NOLA Gold can continue that momentum. They took it to Rugby New York. They took the Utah Warriors. Old Glory DC coming off a big statement win. NOLA Gold coming off a big statement win. Who's going to come out on top here? I think it'll be super interesting to see. I think it's going to be a close one as well.
And for me, I'm playing all my guys. I'm playing all my guys in this one. I think this is going to has the chance to be like a high scoring affair, lots of fantasy points on both sides of the ball. I'm really starting anyone that you have confidence in this matchup heading into this one.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see Rodney Iona versus Tito Diaz-Bonilla, two new guys in the league, and 2 guys that are kind of got the hot hand for both of their teams and are driving their team.
All right, who are you picking in this one? I think I have a feeling.
Oh, we know I'm going with the NOLA Gold.
There you go. I'm going Old Glory DC here.
You would.
I think that that they'll be able to halt what is this explosive Nolan Gold side, but who knows? Again, this is one that can go really either way. All right.
And they're at home, so you got to look at that.
And that is the biggest factor too. I think that we've realized how big of a home field advantage has played so far this season for a whole bunch of teams. So I think this is a very even matchup between these two sides. I think they're middle tier teams. That's I think obviously Old Glory DC in their matchups to start the season have been playing some pretty tough performers between the New England Free Jacks, New York Ironworkers, New England Gold obviously coming to that tough start. So again, this is one that's really going to dictate a lot, I think, identity-wise for these both teams, but I think the home field advantage does play in Old Glory DC's favor. All right, shifting over to the second matchup of the Saturday, the New England Free Jacks at home taking on the Dallas Jackals. I don't think there's much to be said about this one. Play your New England Free Jacks players. Don't play your Dallas Jackals players outside of some guys. Look out for the Dallas Jackals set piece. I wouldn't start them this week, but I would definitely keep an eye on him. But again, New England at home, they're going to be dominant.
Yeah, look to be. Yeah, they're gonna. I'm with you there. I think New England Free Jacks are going to suffocate that Dallas Jackals offense. Especially, I'm just going to say this out there: if you see Danny Christensen come on, be worried. Those guys are going to get smoked.
All right. Next matchup of the Saturday, Utah Warriors taking on the Toronto Arrows at home. This one should be an interesting one because obviously the Toronto Arrows have been struggling. The Utah Warriors, though, coming off of a tough win against the Nola Gold, and I don't think they're necessarily at the performance level that they would hope that they want to be at. It's tough, though. I think just because of what we've seen from the Toronto Arrows so far, I'm staying away from all the guys that we mentioned before in terms of positions that we're staying away from. You may look at some of those centers. You may look at Sam Malcolm. Obviously, he's going to be in your lineup, but anyone outside of that, you're really shying away from.
Yeah, I would definitely look. They've got a lot of injuries. I think they're going to struggle. We saw that last time that they played the New York Ironworkers when they had a lot of injuries. They struggled. Nobody on their team performed. Utah Warriors are going to come out with a win here. I would say even to the point of let's pick up your Utah Warriors players. If you can stream a Utah Warrior guy, I would do it because I think that they're going to win big here.
And I kind of regret it on the Road to Glory podcast. I predicted the Toronto Arrows in this one just because I was getting peer pressure to stay with my Canadian roots there.
Boy, hedge your bets, buddy.
I gotta hedge my bets. I'll say Toronto here just because I'm hoping for the Arrows to get into the win column. But I think I agree with you. I think the Utah Warriors are gonna really take it to them in this one. But my heart says differently. All right, shifting on over to the last Saturday matchup, Houston taking on Rugby Atlanta at home. I think that Houston's coming off of a bye. Rugby Atlanta, obviously not to the capabilities that we thought that they would be at. I think you're obviously playing your Houston guys, and you're a little bit questioning your Rugby Atlanta guys here in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that this one's going to be a closer one than we think. But yeah, I agree with you. I think the Houston guys are going to come out on top. They're going to be coming off bye. They're going to be well rested. And who knows? Yeah, I think maybe something to watch out for from this Houston lineup. One, Dean Muir potentially back. Maybe they put him in a graphic. Two, Lourdes Vanderskiff. Is he coming back? How does he fit into that lineup? What does that look like? Does Christian Dyer go to the wing? But that center combo is looking incredible already. We'll have to see. So definitely watch out for those guys if you're a fantasy manager or owner of those players.
I'm going Houston SaberCats on this one.
Oh yeah, I'm going Houston SaberCats.
All right, and then the only matchup on the Sunday, once again, the Chicago.
What is up with this?
Taking on the Seattle Seawolves. I know. I guess it's like
they put two games at 4:30. They put two games at the same time on the Saturday. They can't just put one on during the day on Saturday and put one a little bit later. Like,
yeah,
I don't know, Ryan. I don't know.
But yeah, the Chicago Hounds taking on the Seattle Seawolves at home. I guess the big question in this one, are you confident, because we know how stout the Seattle Seawolves D is, how confident on a scale of 1 to 10 are you with the back line of the Chicago Hounds?
Yeah,
particularly Bill Meeks, Mark O'Keefe, and
my first thought, Ryan, is that those three, you saw a big week from all three of them. You saw a big week from the whole back line. We're not going to see the same this week. They're going to come back down to earth. maybe even below earth. Who knows? But the Seattle Seahawks defense, and especially in the centers, is just unreal, and they really know how to shut down big key guys. I definitely would expect a lot less points this week than last week.
All right, the question for you then, does anyone on this back line between Mark O'Keefe, Chris Smettina, Bryce Campbell, Julian Dominguez, and Bill Meeks, assuming those are the guys that are starting this week, do any one of them surpass over 100 meters gained this week?
I think Chris Smettina surpasses 100 meters gained. I think a guy like the fullback position is one that you can expect or has the best chance to get over 100 meters gain, just because we know that depending on who the 10 is for Seattle Seawolves, they're going to have some counterattacking, and the counterattacking is a great way to just rack up some meters gain. I think Chris Medina probably has the best chance to do that.
All right, and then on Seattle Seawolves side, I'm playing all my Seawolves. I am playing whoever starts at 10. That will be interesting to see after a bye week.
Yeah.
Is Jordan Chait back healthy? Was he injured? Not sure. AJ Alatimu, does he start? Going to be interesting there. I think that's going to say a lot. And then obviously your key player guys, Duncan Matthews is in there. Reichard Hadding is in there for you. I think they're all going to cash in.
And a sneaky little pickup, a guy who's on our waiver wire. I'm going to keep saying this every week, but Nakai Penny, another sneaky little pickup, especially against Chicago Hounds. The other storyline that I'm really looking at is Footy or Mooneyham. Who are they going to play? You know, Footy has an unreal last 2 weeks. Mooneyham is kind of their big signing from the offseason. That is the speedster on the wing that's expected to do great things for them. What goes on there? They're facing the Hounds coming off a bye week. Who do they throw in there? Do they give Mooneyham another shot? If so, a possible streamer for him as well.
Yeah, going to be interesting. And I will remind viewers and listeners as well that it is Nakai Penny who's been taking advantage the most of the Ronan Foley injury.
Yeah.
Haven't heard any updates about Ronan Foley. Not sure if he'll be back this week after the bye week, but that is something to definitely keep an eye on. It is Seattle Seawolves in this one, though, even though they're away.
Oh, yeah. Seattle Seawolves, without a doubt. We didn't even have to say that. We all knew that both of us were picking Seattle Seawolves.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, hey, should be another exciting matchup of rugby in this one. I feel like some of the results are outside of maybe the new Old Glory DC NOLA Gold one. I think I'm pretty confident in the results that we've predicted in this matchup. Which one? What other matchups give you kind of pause here in this one?
Nothing. I'm just never confident in my guesses. You know, so if something happens in the MLR, Dallas Jackals almost pulled out a win last week when we thought Chicago Hounds were just gonna roll over them.
That's fair enough.
You know, NOLA Gold is coming out beating the New York Ironworkers like 37-5.
That's
like.
True.
You never know with the MLR. Yeah, we know what teams, some teams we know are going to lose, but at the end of the day, it always comes with surprises, Ryan.
That is true. Well, hey, one thing that isn't going to be a surprise is your confidence heading into this matchup after putting up a triple-digit performance. Who do you got coming up in this week? Who you?
Oh, I got Bill, Stephen Lowen, Feral Hippies, and I get my boy Duncan Matthews back off of bye. Nate Oxberger goes on bye. That's fine, no big deal. Duncan Matthews, we know, is that driver for this rock and roll squad.
And we'll see whether or not Vandy can keep his winning ways going against Rugby Morning this week. So that should be interesting. We'll know.
Let's go, Vandy.
We'll know Fitzy of Rugby Morning is going to be heated after that past week of getting.
Imagine if he loses to both the hosts, Ryan.
That would be something. That would be something. But we are going to find out after what is going to be an exciting round 6 of rugby. Again, it's been a super fun ride here so far. 6 weeks or I guess 5 rounds into this season with this whole fantasy rugby thing, the way things have changed and developed in terms of the new stats that we're tracking, the fact that we have a website now, go check it out, thefantasyruckers.com. Got stats up there. It's been really fun stuff. So even if you're not fantasy particular, I mean, even just going on there to see how certain players are doing, it's also a great resource for that. Again, follow us at the Fantasy Ruckers if you want to know anything regarding fantasy MLR. And then again, the description down below, we got our Discord community invite link down there for you to join if you want to chat a little fantasy or fantasy MLR or just all things MLR, or even just, you know, with all the crazy stuff going rugby in the rugby world. I mean, it's got Super Rugby going on. Ireland just won the Grand Slam. Lots of crazy stuff. So make sure you're checking all that out with that. But yeah, should be an exciting round 6, Maddie. And we'll see whether or not this time next week you are still atop of the Fantasy Ruckers League rankings, because we do have Hokie with the Dankest Anchor Ruckers still hanging with you.
Ah.
Maybe not from a point total perspective, but definitely from a records perspective. So we'll see whether or not that stays the same moving forward.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. And, only time will tell, Ryan.
All right. So everyone enjoy your round 6 of Fantasy MLR. I'm Ryan Yee, and of course, this is Matt Yee with me every single week, and we will see you next time.
Going down, Steven.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.